Flora transmigrated into the heavenly realm by Reflections on the Pool, also known to you as Shiny Hedgepig. Book 1, Chapter 5. Office Party or War Memorial. Palace of the Heavenly Emperor was a sprawling labyrinth of rooms and corridors, interspersed with courtyards, orangeries, and rooftop terraces filled with plants. In the centre of the complex was a large ornamental garden, open to the air and filled with what seemed like every deity in the heavenly realm. Warm, gentle sunlight filtered through the leaves of heavily manicured laurel and fig trees onto the gathered attendees of the event. Not a single leaf or flower was out of place. Trailing ivy and clematis were expertly draped over arches and walls. Roses in orange and yellow hues were mixed in with herbs in borders filled with polished sea glass. Bruised leaves of the oregano and basil plants that lined the paths around the event space gave off a pleasant aroma. They added a calming and homely scent to the heady perfume of flowers. Gentle music was playing somewhere among the sculptured topiary, loud enough to be heard, distracting but not disrespectful to the nature of what was happening. If any event needed a calming vibe, it was this one. Throughout the garden, deities from both the heavenly realm and the underworld were mixing, somewhat awkwardly, amongst the foliage, dressed in their best, dressed to the nines, gold glittering off of the neck, wrist and finger, jewels hanging from chains and sewn into thickly woven and embroidered clothing. Only the manner in which they dressed really separated those belonging to the heavenly realm and those who resided in the underworld apart. Bright colours, pastels, and brilliant white fabrics being heavily popular in the streets of the heavenly city amongst its residents, contrasting heavily with the dark autumnal dress of the underworld deities. Several thousand years had passed since the Battle of Wind-Blown Tears had ended the war between both realms. In the early days, the attendees had all participated in it in some way, and emotions had run high. Even now, so much time had passed, and the then-named Demon Realm had gone through some serious rebranding. It was hard to forget the blood that had been spilled. There were few people now who had been there on that blood-soaked mountainside that were still capable of attending. The original atmosphere of mourning had softly ebbed away, leaving a formal event to attend. So many deities still attended because of the opportunity to see and be seen. It wasn't often they got to mingle with the deities of the opposite realm, and it was a great networking opportunity. Remembering the battle and the citizens who had fell still happened, but the atmosphere was a lot lighter and considerably more civil. No longer a powder keg. After everyone had had enough time. After everyone had had enough time to hang out, meet, greet, and eat a few of the overly decorated canapes, the real event began. In front of a set of white marble statues stood the Emperor of the Heavenly Realm and the King of the Underworld, side by side. Both were wearing armour that felt oddly out of place in the now white-tie atmosphere of the event. They approached the statues together, armour clanking noticeably as they descended the stairs that led down to the fountain. Their pace sedate as if both monarchs were leading a funeral cortege. Each statue in the fountain was true to life in the size it depicted its subject, something that made the previous god of war's figure all the more impressive. He stood over everyone imposingly, a stern expression upon his face, wearing his iconic golden armour. It was embossed with columbine flowers and featured extremely detailed swans in inlaid mother of pearl. Despite its highly decorative nature, the set of armour had been his favourite to wear into battle because of its comfortable fit. His right hand was holding a sword outstretched as if he was still fighting an invisible opponent. Blood dripped along the blade down into the decorative reservoir of the fountain, where it diffused into the water. The other statue was of the wheat god Dethos, crying over bent and battered unripe wheat sheaves held in his arms. Blood dripped from his eyes, flowing over the sheaves and dripped into the water below, where it pooled around his feet. It created an incredibly morbid-looking water feature, a holdover from the old times when blood had held so much more meaning. Among the attendees, the chatter dropped to silence as the Emperor of the Heavenly Realm and the King of the Underworld both reached the narrow, white bridge over the blood-soaked waters. It led to a raised platform that stood between the two statues, where they both made a great show of greeting each other with impeccable politeness. They both gave speeches on the Battle of of wind-blown tears, the same speeches that had been given for years. Minds in the crowd started to wander a little. Everyone knew the entire speech well enough at this point that they were almost entirely redundant. We gather here as we do every. I'm glad that you all took the time out of your busy attending, grateful for their sacrifice, 4,000 years healing. Times have changed. Salmon slices arranged into roses with cucumber fans, 3 centimetre square pieces of toast with 12 different toppings on, and toothpicks that had a tiny piece of chocolate cake and some sort of berry impaled on them were being handed round on trays. No one here needed to eat it. It was simply something to do. The memorial moved on to talk about the losses that had occurred during the war and the hard-fought diplomacy many had worked on afterwards to give them all the life that they had now. Starting a war was infinitely easier than sewing up the wounds afterwards. Another memorial ceremony was going to take place the following week in the underworld, held by the king and his consort with rites performed by the deities of death. It was a noticeably more solemn and less well-attended function than this one. Praises were said for the former god of war, and a small offering of a golden life laid in the flames at the feet of his statue, before attention turned to Dethos. With the change in attention, so too did the mood of the room change. It was one thing to phase out during speeches for a god of war who was dead, gone, and already replaced, another to do it when the god of wheat was mentioned. The head seat at the war department was somewhere that could never stand empty for long. Humans were always going to need a god of war. Unlike him, there was still hope for the god of wheat. His palace stood empty, and his responsibilities left undone. That hope was slowly draining away as the time slowly slipped by, without any word. With every year, he did not reappear amongst them. Together, the two leaders held up small, carved crystal cups filled with whiskey in one hand, and a small loaf of seed-encrusted brown bread on the other. The Emperor of Heaven and the King of the Underworld both recited Dethos's most popular prayer together as they placed the offerings. It came from thee, and so it returns, through our hands, relieved of winter's concerns. Each loaf of bread was carefully balanced in the statue's outstretched hands, alongside the damaged wheat already being held there. Then the King of the Underworld set the bread on fire, the garden filling with the scent of burnt toast, before they both poured the whiskey reverently at his feet. It pooled there, floating on top of the blood-stained water for some time, before they began to mix together. The King of the Underworld looked out into the crowd whilst carefully pouring his share of the whiskey offering. It was nice to see so many people here still, after all this time. But as he took in the faces of the deities here, he noticed someone was very visibly missing. Someone very important. Someone that, now he came to think about it, was never here during the ceremony. Current god of war. Mini theatre. Dethos. Blood. A blood water feature. That's what they decided to make? Former god of war. I like it. Dethos. You would. End of Book 1, Chapter 5.